Hello, welcome everyone. I see we have our participants coming. We'll wait for 1 more minute to start our webinar. Hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone joining us today. We're extremely happy to see that you are joining us to celebrate World Wetlands Day. My name is Devashini Rola. I am a research associate here at the G20 Global Initiative Coordination Office. Our initiative recognizes that restoration requires a collaborative effort, strengthening exchanges and collaboration between relevant parties worldwide. So marking the occasion of World Wetlands Day 2023, which is today, our coordination office, our initiative coordination office, in partnership with Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, United Nations Environmental Program, Center for Vegetation Cover Saudi Arabia, PEDR, and Wetlands International have gathered together to celebrate wetlands. This year, the theme of World Wetlands Day is It's Time for Wetlands Restoration. Now, this theme specifically highlights the urgent need to prioritize wetland restoration. And today, I'm excited to invite you guys, as we have an amazing and inspiring list of speakers and presenters from different sectors, such as academia, governmental sectors, and international agencies. We are grateful for their time. And now, without any further ado, and keeping the interest of time, I would like to invite Dr. Musunda Mumba, Secretary General of the Convention of Wetland. Dr. Mumba, I would also like to say that we are extremely delighted and grateful to have you open for our webinar, even with your busy schedule, and welcome. You have the floor now, Dr. Mumba.
Thank you so very much. Really excited, and thank you very much to the UNCCD team, to many partners, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, and many people joining from around the world. Happy World Wetlands Day. And I would like to talk about, really in line with the theme, the essence of time. It's really amazing and exciting for me, since I just joined the convention 4 months ago, exactly yesterday, and coming into this role of the Secretary General, having been through the last COP last year at COP14 and listening into the concerns and really highlighting what was happening around the world. Coming into the end of the pandemic, our contracting parties flagged the very essence of time. We need to do something different. Time is of the essence. We have 7 years left, if not less. I mean, the countdown, the clock is ticking before the end of the SDGs. And really, for me, what's even quite exciting and rather interesting is that I realize, and I'm beginning to feel like I'm feeling old, because in my lifetime, certain rivers have stopped flowing to the sea. In our lifetime, certain species have disappeared. In our lifetime, many wetlands have disappeared, or they're very degraded. So surely time is of the essence. I'm so excited to see the number of speakers who are going to be talking about different elements, be it wetlands, be it peatlands, be it carbon, be it species, but more importantly, people, us. What do we want to do differently? My vision is really envisioning that this campaign is not just for this day, today as World Wetlands Day. I'm hoping that we work together as we're a part of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration to do many activities going ahead in this year. There's going to be quite a lot of initiatives coming in and with foresight looking into some of the meetings and events that are coming. But meetings and events are just exactly that. But where does the action begin? And the action begins with us. And that's why I'm really, really excited, even with the title of this webinar, Revive and Restore. How do we revive? What I've been listening to and just talking to many people over the last few months is the power and element of intersectionality. We cannot talk about wetlands without talking about species. We cannot talk about wetlands without talking about climate change. We cannot talk about wetlands without talking about infrastructure. We cannot talk about wetlands without talking about youth. We cannot talk about wetlands without talking about food. The very intersectionality of this topic, we cannot talk about wetlands without talking about us, people that depend on them. And so the more I really delve into the different conversations and listening into the different sectors, be it private sector, be it indigenous peoples, be it young people, and also be it from the element of multilateralism, really there is urgency right now. I want to talk very quickly and say that, look, as we inch closer and closer to 2030, I think a few years ago when 2015 happened and all the, the Agenda 2030s came on the table, it was very interesting. 2030 looked so far and so far-fetched. And yet, in just these few years of being within this sustainable agenda of SDGs, we have seen rivers dry. We saw this happen here in Europe, parts of Switzerland here where we are, just here in the Jura, not far from where our offices are, we're extremely dry over the summer. Many parts we saw rivers drying in Europe, no boats flowing or moving to deliver food, to deliver, all the different merchandise to the sea. The element of intersectionality, businesses were stopping. That is all to say that we cannot talk about wetlands without talking about these elements of connections. And this is what excites me also about our relationship to the Convention on Desertification, because when we talk about wetlands, we're also talking about land, the element of land, and why we have to be very mindful in thinking about what role and where are these wetlands sitting in different parts of the world, be it in Alaska or be it in New Zealand or Tasmania. I'm really, really excited to see the list of speakers, the thinkers in academia, the doers on the ground, the people within multilateral spaces, and how we all come together to really push this agenda around these vital and critical ecosystems. So without further ado, I just want to say time really is of the essence. And quite frankly, we don't have the time. We have to do things differently. And in doing things differently, not just for the survival of these ecosystems, even for our very own survival as humans, that is very, very critical. So thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to listening in to all the different speakers, because I see so many familiar names and so many other names that I'm not familiar with. I'm really, really excited to listen and to learn as well on how best we can collaborate and work together going forward. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mumba, for your inspiring words. And now it is my pleasure to present a short video statement from Mr. Ibrahim Tio, the Executive Secretary of UN Convention to Combat Desertification. Can we please have Mr. Tio's short video? Thank you for your patience, everyone, as
I grew up thinking that wetlands can only be used for livelihoods. I caught fish, I practiced recession agriculture, and I collected firewoods and herbs from floodplains. Wetlands were also my playground. As a professional, I took part to a Ramsar COP in Canada, where I was exposed for the first time to the idea of wetlands being used for drainage and misused for human activities. The concept of wise use of wetlands was born as a compromise and a bridge between the need to make use of this essential resource for millions and the absolute necessity of protecting these vital ecosystems. Wetlands are sometimes called nature's kidneys because of how critical they are for the overall health of our planet. Wetlands in drylands have the double characteristics of being critically important for life and being extremely vulnerable. Indeed, drylands experience prolonged periods of drought and water scarcity. As such, they are being critically threatened by human activities and environmental change. Celebrated this year under the theme, "It's Time for Wetlands Restoration," World Wetlands Day is particularly appealing to the UN Convention to combat desertification. We must invest in wetlands restoration and regeneration. This requires a concerted effort from governments, civil society, and the private sector. Invest in science and technology for innovation, infrastructure for effective management, and financial mechanism to support wetlands restoration. We must protect and manage wetlands in a way that considers the needs of local communities and the rights of indigenous peoples. We must remember that wetlands are not just important for us, but they are part of our shared heritage. They are a source of beauty and wonder, and they are a reminder of our interconnectedness with nature. They are the main source of livelihoods for millions around the world. We at the UNCCD are proud to join in this celebration and recognize the unique and valuable ecosystem services provided by wetlands. We are committed to doing our part to conserve and protect wetlands, and we are calling on all of you to join us in this vital cause. On this World Wetlands Day, let us come together in a unified voice to revive and restore these essential habitats. Together, we can make a difference.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank Mr. Tao for that statement and his constant support in organizing this webinar. With this, I would like to open the floor for our panelists. But before that, a quick introduction. With this today, we have Jane Madwick, Chief Executive Officer, Wetlands International, who will be speaking about accelerating wetland restoration, building with Nature Asia. Ms. Mireille Attila, Head of Nature for Climate Branch, United Nations Environmental Programme, who will be talking to us about the role of Decade of Ecosystem Restoration in wetlands management. Dr. Khalid Abdulkar, CEO, National Center for Vegetation Development and Combating Desertification, Saudi Arabia, who would be speaking about NCVC's effort for wetland restoration under Saudi Green Initiative. Ms. Diana Kopensky, Global Peatland Coordinator, United Nations Environmental Programme, who would be talking about the importance of wetland and restoration. Professor Olaf Linden, World Maritime University, Mangrove Restoration in Niger Delta. Dr. Diki Samarkir, G20 Global Land Initiative technical expert, who will be talking to us about peatlands in Indonesia. Professor E.B. Kokulu, River State University for Science and Technology, Nigeria, who would be talking to us about urban wetland degradation and restoration. Liz Muller-Bernhardt, Freshwater Unit, United Nations Environmental Programme, who would be talking to us about restoring wetlands as nature-based solution, linking and scaling to global processes. And finally, we have Dr. Murli Tumarakudi, Director of G20 Global Land Initiative Coordination Office, who would be enlightening us about the G20 Land Initiative's role in wetland restoration. Also, during this segment, we would listen to the speakers first, and each speakers will have 5 minutes for their presentation, and then we would be opening the floor for question and answers, and we would be collecting question and answers from you, everybody who's been connected to us from their offices, from their laptops, from their homes. And I would like to request all the participants to keep submitting their questions, and we will pick them up during the end. Additionally, the session is recorded and it is also live on our social media platform. Also, if you as participants are curious about our speakers full bio will be posted on our website. So you could, right after the event, we will be posting their bios, and you could head to our website to get more information about them. Right, so moving forward with this, I would like to invite Ms. Jane Madwick for her remarks. Ms. Jane Madwick, you have the floor.
Thank you, and I'm honoured to take part in this session. So the addition of inland and coastal water targets into the global biodiversity framework at the recent Biodiversity Summit in Montreal is in recognition of the crucial role that wetlands play for biodiversity, climate, and human security. And we have seen how losing and degrading around 90% of the world's wetlands contributes to the intensity and impacts of floods, droughts, fires, and heat waves. We understand better how losing freshwater biodiversity and natural water flows costs lives and impacts livelihoods, our health, and our human spirit. But on the other hand, it's clearly demonstrated that we can reverse this situation and these trends by restoring wetlands. And now the challenge is about how to restore wetlands at a sufficient pace and scale. And we estimate that to meet the new global targets of restoring 30% of degraded wetlands by 2030, this means restoring a minimum of 350 million hectares of inland waters and 300,000 kilometers of rivers. And other science-based targets are on the table. For example, restoring 15 million hectares of mangroves by 2030 and 50 million hectares of peatlands by 2050. But just as important as these restoration targets is perhaps tackling the drivers of wetland destruction, including by transforming agriculture and aquaculture and ending harmful subsidies, like those that incentivize drainage or wasteful irrigation, as well as reorientating economic and financial systems towards nature-positive actions. Action on these restoration targets needs to be inspired and guided by sound knowledge. And perhaps a good example of this is our Global Mangrove Watch, which is an online knowledge base that provides actionable information. And in turn, this drives plans and investments for mangrove protection and restoration globally and in countries. This kind of approach is needed for other wetland types and major regions. For example, the Sahel region, where seasonally flooded wetlands are shrinking and highly threatened due to water diversions and climate change. This is driving food insecurity and even social conflicts. And we believe that securing and restoring water flows and incentivizing communities here to restore naturally productive and biodiverse wetlands, this will be essential to reverse land degradation and bring lasting peace. We need shifts in political will, of course, to bring these kinds of changes. And to reach the global targets, there are many other challenges to address. I'd like to mention just three. We need to build capacity in countries to translate global targets into national plans. We need to enable whole landscape recovery by bringing in technical support and finance in ways that work for smallholder farmers, fishers, and indigenous communities. And we need to put in place inclusive governance so that the benefits of restoration can be equitably shared amongst stakeholders. The good news is there are many examples of how to do this well, and the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration has identified the first 10 world restoration flagships. And I want to proudly mention the one led by Wetlands International called Building with Nature Indonesia. The problem we addressed was the rapid erosion along the north coast of Java in Indonesia, causing 30 million people to be at risk. With the former mangrove belt gone, the coast became highly exposed to storms and sea level rise. Formerly productive lands were lost, and all attempts with hard infrastructure, seawalls, and mangrove planting failed to solve the problem. What we did was to build a big picture understanding on why the mangroves were lost. And based on that, and combining ecological and engineering expertise, we designed a method to trap the sediment on the foreshore, creating a suitable environment for the mangroves to recover naturally. By developing a shared vision and plan of action with all stakeholders, we had the basis for action and transforming the landscape along the most affected coastal zone. So the result was that erosion was stopped, mangroves recovered on the new sediment, creating a protective mangrove belt. And inland, we combined mangrove recovery with promoting more sustainable aquaculture practices. And this improved fishery production and enhanced local livelihoods. The redesigned landscape is now more dynamic and adaptive to climate change. But ultimately, this program succeeded because of a complex web of actors working together. The consortium included ecologists, hydrologists, and engineers. Local communities were in the driving seat, and there was ownership across government stakeholders from the outset. This building with nature approach has since been adopted and replicated across Indonesia by the government, and there is now wide interest in other Asian countries. Together with partners, we're aiming to see these kind of results in 15 more major landscapes in 5 countries by 2030. So this is Building with Nature Asia. And finally, I want to say that in order that wetlands can be recovered to play their vital roles, we need all of society to get involved. It's really encouraging that there's more and more groups and platforms led by young people demanding and driving action. And there's many civil society groups working to defend and restore local wetlands. I believe these are just as important as the large-scale programs that I have mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jane Madvik. With this, I would like to move forward by inviting Ms. Mary Attila, who's head of UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration at the United Nations Environmental Programme. Ms. Mary, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Deva. I hope that you can see me and hear me. I am actually joining this webinar from the wetland right at the margin of Mata Atlântica in Brazil, the Atlantic Forest, which is one of the UN Decade World Restoration flagships. And I was very, very pleased to hear Dr. Jane presenting also on another UN Decade World Restoration flagship, the Building with Nature Indonesia, that is a fantastic example of biomimicry and how by taking inspiration from nature, we actually can become better as a society. I would like, in my 5 minutes, I would like to dedicate maybe 30 minutes of that time to invite our 600 plus attendants today, participants today, to join me in an experience, in a sensory experience. I would like to invite everyone to close their eyes and to imagine that against your dry skin, you have a dry sponge, and that you're rubbing that sponge against the dry skin of your hand, for example. I'd like you to take in that sensation, imagine that sensation, take it in. And then now imagine that against your dry hand, you actually have a wet sponge. And now rub that wet sponge against your dry hand and take it in. And lastly, I would like you to imagine that you have a wet sponge against your wet hand and rub this again against your hand and take that experience in. Now, if I can invite us to all open our eyes and really imagine that wetlands in nature are the equivalent of that sponge. They are very often referred to as the buffers of nature, as buffers in certain ecosystems. It's because they have the same ability as sponges to absorb additional water and also to release it when there is none. Similar to the second experience, when you have no water, when you have a dry hand and pass a wet sponge on your dry hand, it becomes wet. And wetlands have this phenomenal ability of buffering and playing this role of buffering additional water or releasing water when there is none in their vicinity. Why am I talking about this? Because wetlands are extremely important from a ecosystem, from a climate change adaptation point of view. We see them as one of the no regret restoration options for climate change adaptation. However, I think, as Dr. Jane mentioned, it's restoration done right. Re-wetting a wetland is not equivalent to restoring wetlands, and understanding not only the drivers of wetland loss, but also the historical historical reasons behind that and processes behind that is quite important. In many areas of the world, it was in the 70s during the Green Revolution that wetlands were drained for purposes of increasing land for agriculture production. Today, as we know, under the UNCCD, we have new concepts of land restoration, land productivity that is not just about yields and doesn't necessarily, where agriculture production and food security doesn't necessarily rely on chemical inputs and mechanical tills and other external processes, but is also about the ability of soils to restore themselves, and wetland in that sense play a critical role in that they can bring up and leach nutrients in soils, therefore enabling that regeneration of soils' productive capacities where it is lost. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration was launched based on the scientific recognition that we have lost, that 60% of ecosystems are degraded within a range of degradation. Hence, we've come to acknowledge the need for restoration. However, it's really critical and important to acknowledge the fact that giving the signal that restoration is positive should not prevent us from protecting and preserving wetlands where they are, as they do play this critical role, as I mentioned, for climate change adaptation. Now, a fact that is not very well known is that wetlands actually are also very important greenhouse gas stores. Usually we will talk about carbon equivalent, about carbon. However, wetlands actually store and have the ability to release methane as well, which is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. So the destruction of wetlands also has a critical role to play in terms of climate change mitigation. And we've seen with the release of the 2021 emissions gap report and adaptation gap report that we are falling way, way behind in terms of our ability to mitigate and our ability to adapt to climate change. So in February last year, the UN Environment Assembly passed a resolution about nature-based solutions, recognizing nature-based solutions beyond carbon, so that it's not only the contribution of wetlands, forests, and other ecosystems specifically as carbon stores and flows, stocks and flows, that is recognized and acknowledged. But going beyond that, their contribution to human well-being, to ecosystem services in general, whether it's provisioning services or others, and they're being a home to many critical species, as was mentioned as well. So this is why, as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, we are currently working on recognizing, on not only acknowledging and channeling carbon offsets into restored ecosystems, but we are also advocating and pushing for the integration of biodiversity uplifts, of resilience components into those financial packages, so that we are able to propose something that, financially speaking, carries weight in comparison with other land uses, with opportunity costs of, draining wetlands on a short-term basis may actually generate significant resources, financial resources for governments to be able to support their populations, reducing poverty and otherwise. So what we want to make sure is that we're targeting a minimum of $30 per ton, plus a premium on biodiversity uplifts and adaptation dividends. I will invite you in closing to look at the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. We have 10 principles of ecosystem restoration that proposes a comprehensive approach, going beyond looking strictly at the ecological aspects, but also integrating social dimensions as well. And I would very much like to invite all the participants, and I'm very happy that we have Secretary General Mumba with us here. And morally, next year in our call for World Restoration Flagships, we will be looking at enhancing the number of urban environments that are submitting their proposals. And as we know, 70% of cities are built on or next to water bodies. So it will be a fantastic opportunity to create that connection between urban environments and wetlands, if I can use the word loosely. So thank you very much again for the invitation to this webinar, and very much looking forward to hearing the rest of it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Attila. Thank you for a very interesting and inspiring talk. I take this opportunity to thank all of our participants. I see that we have amazing numbers, 630 plus participants, and thank you so much for everyone who resonates with this particular issue, and thank you for joining. I also want to take this opportunity to inform you that our participants will be getting a certificate by the end of this webinar. So right after we finish, we will be also distributing our certificates on your mailing list. Without any further ado, I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Khalid Abdulkar from Saudi Arabia. Dr. Khalid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like in the beginning to thank you, NCCD, and also the G20 Global Land Initiative for inviting our center, the National Center for Vegetation Cover Development and Combating Desertification of Saudi Arabia, to participate in this important day, important subject, especially for a country like Saudi Arabia and also for the whole world. Next, please. Next. As maybe most of you know, that Saudi Arabia 2 years ago almost have initiated a big initiative which called the Saudi Green Initiative, targeting 10 billion trees to be planted in Saudi Arabia, or equivalent to 40 million hectares rehabilitation of degraded land. And these huge targets we have put in as key successful factors to be sustainably grown in Saudi Arabia in a drought ecosystem like Saudi, with major successful factors that utilizing native plants of Saudi Arabia, that it is already suitable for the drought region and also adapted to a dry climate. And also to utilize and to use renewable water resources, and also to maintaining ecological balance, especially in areas that it is known for a certain kind of species in Saudi. By the way, in Saudi Arabia is around, we have around 2,600 species in the country. And also utilizing state-of-the-art innovation and technology, and to have a social and economic sustainability in this huge target. Next. As a target huge as this one, we would like really to have a very intensive study that will put a master plan to conduct such initiative in the future decades. And the major question that I would like to be answered by this master plan is the number of trees that Saudi Arabia can sustainably have, and also what are the species suitable for each region of the country. And also we would like to see the optimal location for tree growth, and the type of renewable water resources and requirement for growth as enabler, and how the kingdom can achieve the tree growth targets, and what is the cost associated with this huge program, and the overall socioeconomic and environmental benefits, and the potential risk and mitigation to that. So the master plan will be achieving three major achievements from the strategic point of view, and also the scientific studies that needed to achieve this target, and the technical capabilities that require to be implemented in this initiative. Next, please. We already have divided the kingdom for 13 domains. First of all, the environmental domains, which including different localities, different terrains, such as coastal areas, wetlands, mangrove locations, mountains, and also rangelands and others. The urban domains with targeting urban areas around government facilities, and also green belts, and also governmental facilities, linear such as highways and railways, and agriculture domain. Next, please. So these are the major areas for wetlands, and especially in mangrove locations, and where it is located in the Arabian Gulf regions, around 600 hectares, and also in the Red Sea is around 8,000 hectares in the Red Sea coastal areas, with two major really species in the kingdom, which is mainly as Avicennia marina, and we have some Rhizophyra in some locations. Next, please. And with that also, we are trying to utilize different kind of interventions, either low intervention or medium intervention or very high intervention, where we can increase the potential for a plantation in those regions, especially where we can introduce the mangrove plantation in coastal lagoons, or also in the coastal sabkhas, which is the salt marshes of the region, as also intensive, and using innovative technologies to utilize that. Next. Okay, so this is to finalize. This is a final slide for the initiative, especially for the mangrove plantation in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and hopefully that we are targeting now around 200 million mangrove trees to be planted in the kingdom.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdulkar. Very insightful talk after all. With this, we would like to move forward with Professor Olaf Lindell from World Maritime University. Professor Olaf, you have the floor for you. Professor Olaf, do we have you in the call?
You can go to the next speaker.
Right. So moving forward, I would like to invite Dr. Diki Somarankir from G20 Global Land Initiative, our senior expert. Dr. Diki, you have the floor. Yes,
okay.
Dr. Diki,
thank you very
please.
much, Deepa. Yeah. Okay. Well, I will go straight to my presentation just to save some time. But on this occasion, I would like to share some of the insight regarding wetland restoration based on the experience in Indonesia. So going from the international policy level to the ground. I take Indonesia as an example because talking about wetland and wetland restoration, Indonesia plays a very critical role globally. The country still has huge wetland areas, especially mangrove, as Jane mentioned earlier, and then also those in the peatland areas such as peat swamp and swamp forests. Now, it is a kind of hard to find exact data about the size of a peatland in Indonesia because it changes all the time. But I think it is well known that currently Indonesia still has one of the largest tropical peatlands globally. Unfortunately, this peatland has degraded severely, especially in the last decades, that by 2011, there have been only less than 15 million hectares of peatland left in Indonesia, of which only around half is forested. So this has decreased continuously, so that 10 years later in 2019, only 13.4 million hectare peatlands left, which means there is an annual degradation of around 1% annually. So it gives only some idea about how quick the peatland is degraded in Indonesia. Some other organization, international organizations state or give a higher figure. One, for example, give that the degradation of peatland in Indonesia up to 2015 is around 2.6% annually. Next slide, please. Next, please. So peat degradation occurs mainly because of human activities. So large size of peat swamp and swamp forest in Indonesia have been occupied by human. No, come to the before. Have been occupied by humans, converted, and then cultivated in various forms. Can you go back to the one slide before? So timber extraction for converting and fish pond, conversion to other land uses happen intensive in the last few decades, especially now more and more peatland has been converted into oil palm. So ranging from the small scale oil palm managed by community to large scale of oil palm managed by the company. All these activities usually start with drainage of the peat through construction of canals, which is then followed by land preparation or land clearing, which often using fire that often becomes uncontrolled or become a wildfire. So the dry and burning of the peatland damage not only this often fragile peatland ecosystem, but also cause a very severe environmental impact, including, as mentioned by the presenter earlier, so release of huge amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Fire and peatland fires cause also air pollution and haze, which is, I think, a lot of you know, that's become a serious problem in this region for many, many decades. Now, if you can come please to the next slide. So this image showing a spot taken in Riau province, Indonesia, adjacent to Singapore and Malaysia, that's confirmed what I said earlier, that most of the area has been dried, the peatland has been dried using canal, as you can see maybe in this slide, straight blue lines. This is actually canals built to dry the peatland, and it has been also burned and converted to the agriculture activities. This image shows also that the area is dense populated. A lot of villages and settlements can be found in that area. Now, studies and field observation has disclosed that communities living in this area are, at least part of them, are involved directly and indirectly in these destructive activities, saying that draining the peatland and putting fire, burn to clear the land. So there are many reasons for that, but mostly because of poverty, because lack of alternative livelihood, and because lack of clarity over the useful right to manage the land. So the reality is that community is part of the problem. But at the other hand, community could be also part of the solution because they are on the sites. They know the local situation, and potentially they can assist the activities to protect and restore wetland effectively. Next slide, please. In fact, the involvement of our community has increasing in the last few years. Can you show the next slide, please? So, and has become an integral component for various programs that has been designed mainly by the government, but implemented in collaboration with universities, with NGO and others. So the activities are directed mostly towards 3R. One is that rewetting of the dried peatland through canal blocking, and then also backfilling of the canals, and then revegetation of degraded peatland through enrichment planting, and also replanting usually with local multi-purpose tree species. But finally, but it's also not less important, is that creating a local livelihood. So to encourage the community to support the activities, and at the same time to enable the participation of a local community which living in the poverty. Now, there has been a lot of progress made in the last few years, as you can see in this slide. So thousands of canals have been blocked and backfilled, of 10,000 of degraded peatland has been revegetated, and others. So all this has contributed significantly to a better management and better protection of degraded peatland, which is around 3.6 million hectares in concession area, oil palm, timber, and so on, and over 1 million hectares outside of concession area, including in the communities areas. This can be achieved because, again, active participation of local community. In fact, in the last 7 to 8 years, the Indonesian government, through the Indonesian Peat and Mangrove Restoration Agency, in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and supported by NGOs, by universities, by companies, have assisted over 700 peat care self-reliant villages that, with 3,000 community groups and with around 30,000 households as members, have actively protect and restore the peatland in Indonesia. Now, one of the achievements can be seen in this graphic, that the area of the burned peatland has decreased significantly since 2015. Now, dear colleagues, I use the presentation to stress the point that efforts to protect and restore wetland, like here in this case it's peatland, will need support and participation of local community. The local community probably have more stake, more interest compared to other stakeholders, because better protected and better managed peatland is very fundamental for their survival. But their support can only be guaranteed if they receive benefit, if they are capacitated and getting support, and if they have a clear user right in managing their land. And finally, I just would like to say, to raise the point that peatland ecosystem is actually very poor. It's actually very fragile, and then also has a low productivity in terms of agricultural cultivation. So meaning that to support the community creating land-based livelihood alternative, it will require significant investment and long term. It will therefore, I think, sustainable and sufficient funding and financing mechanism to ensure the participation of local people to protect and restore peatland will need to be identified and implemented. At this point, I would like to close my presentation and hand it over back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dickey. Now I would like to invite Professor Ibi Kakulu from River State University of Science and Technology from Nigeria. Professor Ibi, you have the stage. Sorry for the intervention. Professor Ibi, we cannot hear you. Sorry, we cannot hear you.
Just check if Olof is here, and then otherwise we'll go to the next, and then we'll come
Right.
to that.
Right. Can we see if Professor Olof is here?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
The slides are not up yet.
Right. Can we have the slides?
Okay, so sorry about that. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining from. I will be speaking very briefly on urban wetlands and just bringing a slightly different dimension to what is happening in some of these wetlands and how wetlands are being converted to other uses. We live in urban areas, and some of us are familiar with urban wetlands, which are areas adjacent to populated areas around cities and provide economic, ecological, and social benefits. Now, urban wetlands do play an important role in terms of making our cities livable. One of the things they do, which is particularly where I will be speaking on the case study, is to reduce the risk of flooding, filter stormwater, replenish groundwater supplies, and several other benefits. They also offer important habitats to plant and animal species. And it's been projected that by the year 2050, about 2/3 of the world population will be living in urban areas. Now, what challenges are we experiencing? Now, governments around the world, particularly in developing countries as well, are in a hurry to sort of meet the demands of other sustainable development goals alongside being compliant with the demands of society today. So one of the things we see is that wetland degradation is on the increase. Can you change the slides, please? Wetland degradation is on the rise, and in some places there's some confusion about how to interpret what's going on. So they're constantly being degraded, they're being unfilled for construction. Some of the reasons are given that, well, we need to satisfy the demands of the SDG 11, where we need to provide housing. And if you look at the images on the right, these are some of the identified wetlands around a city in Nigeria, which already has about 41 established wetland developments. And in 2005, you can see the lush green wetlands there. And over time, between 2005 and 2021, several pockets, government estates actually, of the, several pockets of these areas have been reclaimed by private individuals, slum development. But in recent times, you're having more partnerships between government and private investors and putting up large-scale residential houses within the wetlands. Next slide, please. So Nigeria is really large, and we have wetlands, you have inland, waterways, we have at the coast. And in 2022, we witnessed a major flood disaster in Nigeria, where a lot of communities that, properties had been developed within the wetlands were inundated by flood. So the housing demand leads to uncontrolled development. People develop within the floodplains around the banks of the River Niger, particularly at the confluent cities, where you have Lokoja, Akenebode, Ida. And so we had well over 600 deaths and about 1.4 million people displaced by the last flooding in 2022. So the question is, what can we do? What can the land professionals do? Are we going to, how do we balance the demand for housing? How do we balance, the demand for housing by the urban poor, and government interventions in terms of infrastructure? How can we stop this from continuing? So next slide, please. So what can we do? I mean, what's the narrative for urban wetlands? How can we restore permanently damaged lands? And one of the suggestions for, this World Wetland Day would be for us to begin to think about a more pragmatic approach to urban wetland restoration. How can we have a more pragmatic approach that is able to balance all the demands and make decisions on whether you can have, wise use or wise different forms of wetland conversion, or how we can stop wetland conversion altogether to other uses. So we're hoping that, as a global land initiative, we might be in a position to explore possible options, alternatives that can enable developing countries reduce their development footprints on natural wetlands. This is very common. It's not something that is just out of the blues. If you look at the image on the right again, this is a more recently converted wetland, the Sandfield region. You look at the top, that was, as far back as 2005, and as of 2023, that is another massive tranche of land that has recently been sandfilled, and so it's permanent damage to the wetland. And one of the suggestions would be to find ways to halt and as much as possible reverse wetland destruction, wetland conversion, and I'm hoping that, the World Wetlands Day of 2023 can mark the beginning of meaningful partnerships for incorporating wetland restoration concepts and systems thinking into urban planning. Because a lot of these activities are actually being planned by governments. So they're not like slum encroachment or slums encroaching on the wetlands. These are actual, sometimes foreign investors investing in these reclamation and putting up very large projects. Next slide. So I just want to thank you for listening. This is just meant to be a teaser to let you see how people are still degrading the wetlands, converting the wetlands, and where we're having irrecoverable wetland destruction in and around some of the developing nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ibi. Now we have Ms. Liz Mala-Barnhart, from Deputy Head of Freshwater Unit from United Nations Environmental Programme. Ms. Liz, you have the floor now.
Thank you so much, Deva. My name is Liz Mullen-Bernhardt. I'm joining you today from UNEP's Freshwater Unit at our headquarters in beautiful Kenya. Happy World Wetlands Day, and it's a pleasure to be with all of these inspiring speakers and with all of you in the audience for this exciting webinar. Thank you to UNCCD for hosting. I'm going to be spending my 5 minutes talking about what to me are some inspirational examples around the world of wetland restoration that UNEP has been supporting. Also, how I see wetlands really rising up and gaining more awareness in the nature-based solutions space. And finally, how I see this momentum really fitting into and hopefully accelerating other major global processes and commitments. Let's stay on this slide for just a second. To start off, I wanted to share, sorry, next slide. Yes, thank you. I wanted to share some inspirational examples that we've seen and helped to support in different regions around the world. And I placed a special focus on wetlands meeting some of the challenges in urban areas in particular, but this could really be in any kind of ecosystem. The first one that you see on the left is in Latin America, in the city of San Salvador. My colleague Mireille talked eloquently about sponges, and this is a so-called sponge city, which is restoring its natural ecosystems to improve drainage management and mitigate flood risk. And this is being done through what's known as the City Adapt project. In the middle, from the coast here in Kenya, the Shimo La Tewa prison in Mombasa has been constructing artificial wetlands to treat its wastewater, which is also serving to provide green space to the prison inmates that are living there. And on the right, we have what is known as the Door of the Desert in Ouarzazate, Morocco, which is using a series of lagoons to collect and filter household wastewater or gray water, which is then being pumped using solar power to provide water for the planting of more than 600 hectares of trees. Now, these are acting as a protective buffer between the city and the desert, in essence, creating a green belt to hold off desertification, decrease land degradation, and mitigate the impacts of strong winds and dust clouds. So you can really see wetlands in these examples being intentionally restored or created in order to meet a number of interconnected and different challenges around the world. The next slide, please. In my second set of examples, I wanted to zoom in a bit on cities in the Asia-Pacific region. And these are examples that are taken from a recent publication we put out on nature-based solutions for urban water challenges in Asia-Pacific together with CTCM. Up on the upper left is a picture of Bangkok, which has recently embarked on several urban redevelopment projects, such as urban wetlands and environmentally productive parks. And these projects will facilitate water infiltration and enhance urban adaptation to climate change. Down below that, we have in Sri Lanka, where in recent years, the city of Kurunegala has endured severe droughts, floods, and landslides. They are developing an adaptation plan to build overall resilience against natural disasters, which is recommending nature-based solutions approaches that include rainwater harvesting, natural infrastructure solutions like constructed wetlands and reconnecting rivers to their floodplains. And up on the right is the city of Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu, which is the textile capital and known as the Manchester of South India. It's one of the region's most industrialized cities. Now here, 8 lakes within the city connected to the Noyal River have been selected to be revitalized and restored using nature-based solutions to combat the growing pressure of pollution from its textile work. And these solutions include floating and free water surface wetlands inside the lakes and treatment through ecological gray water treatment plants. Next slide, please. Now we're seeing more and more of these kinds of multi-purpose examples of wetland restoration being seen as nature-based solutions around the world. And I believe that's happening because countries are realizing that wetlands are crucial for safeguarding biodiversity, countering the climate crisis, and even cleansing polluted water, and that protecting, restoring, or creating them is critical for addressing these issues. And this has been explicitly mentioned in recent major processes, such as the outcome document of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, which mentions water in its adaptation agenda. And most recently, as my colleague Jane Madrick of Wetlands International just mentioned in her remarks, in the new Global Biodiversity Framework, which specifically mentions inland water, coastal, and marine ecosystems. And we're very pleased to see that a number of countries are aiming to set specific targets for rivers and wetlands under restoration within the Global Biodiversity Framework. Next slide, please. Now, all of these recent commitments have important implications that we must feed back into related global processes. One of those is most definitely the Sustainable Development Goals, where along with the Ramsar Convention, UNEP is supporting countries to monitor changes to their water-related ecosystems within SDG Target 6.6. This indicator already includes ecosystems such as wetlands, but we're hoping for renewed commitment to accelerate progress to achieve this SDG target in the remaining years to 2030 and beyond, so that we can protect the world's remaining wetlands and restore large areas of degraded wetlands. Next slide, please. Finally, we have a major opportunity with the upcoming UN 2023 Water Conference coming next month, which is aiming to accelerate progress on SDG 6. At the beginning of our webinar, the Secretary General of Ramsar, Musanda Mumba, noted what she's seen in her lifetime. And that reminded me that the last time we had a global water conference was in 1977, the year that I was born. So this is literally a once in a lifetime opportunity for us. And for the upcoming water conference, UNEP has been very honored to be able to support, together with WMO and UNDRR, the thematic dialogue on climate, resilience, and the environment. And here we're really seeing a few important and inspirational recommendations starting to emerge. The first is an acknowledgement of the role of wetlands, such as peatlands, and their critical role in climate adaptation and mitigation. The second is an acceleration among countries to adopt environmental economic accounting standards, which will help us be able to value and invest in wetlands to finance their restoration. And the third is a growing understanding of the critical connections between water, nature-based solutions, and implementing other commitments and plans, such as the SDGs and UN Environment Assembly resolutions on nature-based solutions and sustainable lake management, but also climate commitments and plans in the form of NAPs and NDCs. So coming back to what Musanda said, the time to act is now, and we're hoping to see the world move from promises to action in the coming year. I'd like to invite everyone watching to follow, support, and get involved in the UN 2023 Water Conference next month around World Water Day to keep up the momentum from World Wetlands Day. And with that, I will thank you and hand you back over to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kopensky, for a very resourceful and a very interesting presentation from you. Now we have Ms. Diana Kopensky, Global Peatland Coordinator from United Nations Environmental Programme. I have a short video presentation from Diana. Please brace yourself as I present the video.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests and restoration enthusiasts from all around the world. My name is Diana Kopensky, and on behalf of the United Nations Environment Programme, I have the honor of leading the Global Peatlands Initiative. The Global Peatlands Initiative is working hard as a coalition of 52 members for results and impact. We work as a community to bring together the best science to inspire action, inform policies, and help to scale up good practice and secure commitments to act for nature and climate. Success for the climate, planet, and people requires this collective global action. And to do that, we share knowledge across the global network, and bring decision makers together to inform and create public policies, share practice, experience, lessons, and lessons learned for peatlands conservation, sustainable management, and restoration action. Some of the commitments and partnerships we've supported and enabled include the Brazzaville Declaration on Peatlands, the establishment of the International Tropical Peatland Center, the United Nations Environment Assembly 4 resolution on the conservation and sustainable management of peatlands, and also the Local Action for Global Impact movement of the Venice Agreement for Peatlands. In addition to commitments, we have been forging ahead to improve knowledge and our understanding of these carbon and water-packed ecosystems, and we have published a number of resources, including most recently the Global Peatlands Assessment, State of the World's Peatlands. We also last year published the Economics of Peatlands. The State of the World's Peatlands, the GPA, is the most comprehensive and collaborative assessment covering the regions. It's built on contributions of 226 experts from around the world. We've also worked and supported with some of our main partners to develop important guidance materials, including policy briefs and reports, for example, on peatlands and climate action, peatlands inclusion into climate commitments like the NDCs, monitoring and mapping approaches, and peatlands restoration guidance, to name a few. As the GPI, one of our most important roles is to bring together peatlands experts and actors from all around the world and to facilitate intersectoral interaction and interdisciplinary knowledge exchange, especially through South-South and triangular exchange. We've seen that this helps really inform and join up action by many people by providing them with different tools and expertise, different perspectives, and diversity of thinking, so that the ideas we're seeing coming together through policy, through projects, through large-scale programs and initiatives, we're seeing better decision-making made for our climate and nature future. The importance of collaboration to safeguard our precious peatlands cannot be overstated. Wetlands are a cradle of life, and they're one of the most productive ecosystems in the world. Peatlands are a special type of wetland that covers only 3% of our land surface area, but it stores twice as much carbon as all of the world's forests combined. Peatlands are a dynamic, super-based nature solution. They're packing a punch for carbon, water, for nature, and for resilience. And it's because of their role in the landscape, that we need to protect healthy wetlands now, and we need to prioritize peatlands for urgent restoration action, because we depend on their services to survive and to thrive. The next 10 years will count most in the fight against climate and nature emergency, and peatlands are important for this fight. We need to keep them wet or make them wet and healthy again. And the situation is critical, but it's not hopeless. It's imperative that the 88% of the world's peatlands that have not yet been drained or degraded be urgently protected to prevent their imminent release of carbon stocks. This, combined with early action to halt further degradation through the restoration of drained peatlands, can achieve rapid carbon emission avoidance and reductions. If implemented with urgency, the protection, restoration, and sustainable management of peatlands offers a huge win for people, climate, and nature. These actions will simultaneously support biodiversity, improve water quality, reduce flood risk, reduce air pollution from peatland fires, and enhance the protection of important cultural heritage. The benefits are enormous. That's why we have formed an incredible community and network of people working together to advance our understanding, to enable more joined-up action, and to help communities access know-how and finance to restore and protect peatlands in their homelands. We have youth groups like Repeat, Youth Engaged in Wetlands, and the International Forestry Students Association that are all working as part of the Global Peatlands Initiative to motivate and enable youth action for nature and climate. We have researchers collaborating through the Global Peatlands Initiative Research Working Group, working across disciplines to create common methods and measures to find out which peatlands are healthy and which ones need our urgent help. So please do have a look at our Global Peatlands Initiative website. Get in touch and find out how you and your friends and family can make decisions that will help keep peatlands healthy, and connect with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration community as well to find out how you can be involved in this global movement to heal our planet. I invite you once again to join us, to change these attitudes on wetlands, change attitudes on peatlands, and make them known. Take action in your communities to restore, protect, and conserve them. Peatlands matter for the climate, for nature, for people, and for our common future. Thank you very much.
Moving forward, I would like to thank Ms. Kopensky for her video and for her inspiring talk. We would like to check with Professor Olaf Linde one more time. Professor Olaf? Do we have you in the call, Professor Olaf? Right. So lastly, for our last presenter, we have Dr. Murali Tumarukudi from the G20 Global Land Initiative. Dr. Murali, you have the floor.
Thank you, Devasri. I wish Olaf could still be connected, because he had a very interesting presentation from the Niger Delta lined up. Now, first of all, I must say I am extremely impressed by the level of interest in this session and the degree of interest which is sustaining. Now, we started with about 300 people, and now it has gone above 600, and it has stayed above 600 almost all through the session, which is extremely impressive for a webinar. There's also the lineup of speakers which we have in the room. The DG of Ramsar Convention herself came, CEO of Wetland International, chair of NCBC, Mireille, and many of my other friends and others whom I'm not naming because they're all my dear friends. They all came and stayed for this event. So first of all, congratulations for the organizing and excellent participation. I have been, while listening to the presentation, I was also very busy looking at the questions, and there are quite a lot of questions which came up. And I have tried to answer a number of them, and others we would answer. We will not leave them unanswered. We will have them answered, and we'll post it on our website in due course. But I want to say just 2-3 things. First of all, there is clearly a renewed understanding of the importance of wetland around the world now. Part of the reason is the Indonesian tsunami of 2004, when there were anecdotal evidence that areas which had mangroves in the foreshore caused less damage. While mangroves are not really a defense mechanism for tsunami, the sort of linkage got into people's mind. And thereafter, there has been many other incidents where urban wetlands, which were dried out or rebuilt upon, magnified the level of natural disasters. So now I think the world understands the link between wetlands and natural disasters, and they're trying to do something. Liz mentioned about the sponge cities. China has an entire range of cities which are being converted to sponge cities, creating artificial wetlands and regenerating existing wetlands. In my office where I stay in Bonn, as I look out through the window, I can actually see a sponge city being created, digging out a very large park to create space for the Rhine to expand should the next flood come, which unfortunately will always come. So while all this understanding is ongoing, there is also damaged wetlands happening. And this is why wetland restoration is such an important topic. We at the Global Land Initiative, started by the G20 countries in 2020, with an ambition of 50% reduction of degraded land by 2040, also have included the wetlands in our ambition. That's why we are so happy to see both Jane and Musenda mentioning about an ambitious target for wetland restoration. 2022 was a very inspiring year from a restoration point of view, starting with the nature-based solution resolution at UNIA, the UNCCD COP in Abidjan. In August, the Biden White House came out with economic valuation of environmental resources, which Liz also mentioned. By 2035, the United States want to bring its accounting base to include environmental cost and benefits. Like GDP, it will be an environmental inclusive GDP, which is going to have tremendous impact on the way we account for projects. In Sharm el-Sheikh, again, more emphasis on loss and damage and nature-based solution for climate change. And most importantly, in December, at the Global Biodiversity, the Convention of the Parties of the Convention for Biological Diversity, specific targets for restoration was agreed upon, 30% under effective restoration by 2030. As Musenda mentioned, 2030 is now. We just have 7 years left. So there is a tremendous need to accelerate the efforts. A number of questions came up about how youth can be involved, how NGOs can be involved. Please do get in touch. This is the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. The Global Land Initiative is working with the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration and all the other partners who are present here. We will find a way to work together to make restoration happen and wetlands productive again. Thank you, Devasi.
Thank you, Murali, for your presentation. Now, I would like to move forward with our question and answers round. These are the questions that we have picked up from all the participants, from participants who are joining us here on Zoom, and also participants who are joining us through our live streaming on our social media platforms. I would first like to start with Dr. Musunda. So this question is from our participants from the Zoom webinar platform, and it says, now that Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Strategy has proposed specific 30% target for restoration, how Ramsar Convention is planning to incorporate some quantitative targets for wetland restoration? Dr. Musunda, I would like to hand the stage to you.
Dr. Musunda may have left, so please
Right.
maybe ask Jane if she's around and see that question for her.
Moving forward, if Mireille is around, I have.
No, Mireille is not around. Mireille actually
Okay.
mentioned she's.
Right. So for Jane, Ms. Madvik, I have a question. What impact the proposed environmental law on restoration will have on, this is European law on restoration, will have on wetland restoration in Europe and beyond? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, the European Nature Restoration Law, is a groundbreaking law, and it's going to make a real difference in Europe. I would say, however, that probably the weakest part of the law is the wetlands part, sadly. So there are going to be targets for peatlands, but there's lots of exceptions to those targets. But it's definitely going to, overall, the restoration law is going to help to connect the remaining protected areas. It's going to help remove a lot of unwanted, unused dams and other structures in rivers. I think this is really excellent, and it will help to protect and restore more peatlands. It just needs to go a bit further.
Thank you so much, Ms. Madvik. I have a question for Dr. Dickey. Dr. Dickey, do we have you in the call?
Yes, I'm still with you.
Yes. So Dr. Dickey, what are some of the lessons from Indonesia on wetland restoration which the world can learn?
Well, I think what happened in Indonesia is not very special because it happened also everywhere, that the wetland has been degraded through human intervention. But I think what people can learn from Indonesia is that the biggest challenge in improving the management of natural resources like wetland is that clarity about tenures and useful right. I think that's a basic problem where people are still struggling to find the best models how to improve the management. And without that, because the reality is that there is almost no natural resources like wetland, like peatland, like mangrove is not occupied by human in Indonesia. Well, there are some in very remote areas. Now, and then to get rid of these people from the land, and most of these people actually live in that area already before the Republic has been established. So I think that is a really very, very big issue, how to make sure that they don't lose their rights to manage the natural resources, but at the same time to make sure that the peatland is not further degraded through destructive activities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dickey. I would like to move forward with a question for Professor Ibe. Professor Ibe, do we have you on the call?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Perfect. So the question is, how can community interest, in particular women's interest, be factored in designing restoration projects?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, there are several options. In some areas, you have a lot of women who are in the land management professions, and they can spearhead some of the initiatives for land restoration. You also have women who are part of the urban poor, who are unable to find decent housing and tend to be developing within these areas as well. So they are also major stakeholders in the consideration of what should be happening in the wetlands and how they can also contribute towards reducing the footprints of urban development on this wetland. So there's an ample role for women to play in awareness creation, in using their positions by way of influencing urban land policy formulation, and ensuring that restoration is mainstreamed into urban planning. For now, that's not very obvious. So it's like develop where you need to, adhere to planning regulations. But if we can find a way to systematically mainstream restoration into decision-making for urban development, then that will be helpful. And I think women can take the lead, particularly professional women. who are able to make those policy changes and recommendations. I hope that answers the question.
Right, it does. Thank you so much, Professor Ibi. I have a question for NCVC Saudi Arabia. I see that Dr. Amal from NCVC, representative of NCVC, is here in the call. Can we hear from you, Dr. Amal? Are you in the call?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
First of all, thank you so much for this. I will be speaking on behalf of Dr. Khalid, as he just left for another meeting.
Right. So the question for Dr. Amal, or NCVC in general, is what are the specific challenges of wetland restoration in extremely arid countries in the Middle East?
Very interesting question. I would say it would be the weather condition. As you know, the Middle East will have very limited rainfall, rain rates average. So like you see in Saudi Arabia, the average annual rainfall in most part of the country is below 150. So throughout the year, and that's throughout the year, except actually for western areas in the country, which about 400 to 600. So yes, the availability of water is a big issue. So that's why the government of Saudi Arabia has launched a major land restoration program under the Saudi Green Initiative. Of course, an important component of this program relates to the restoration and improvement of protected area, particularly national parks, which like a great that we should be encouraging. That's something that we should be encouraging. Conservation and storage of water resources under the SGI, which will support the cause of reviving natural wetlands, keeping and preserving the national wetlands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amal. For my last question, I have Miss Liz Muller-Bernhardt. Do we have Miss Liz in the call?
I'm here.
Yes, perfect. So the question for Ms. Bernhardt is, what is the link between land and wetland? How will the Global Wetland Conference how will the Global Water Conference address the question of restoration of wetlands and urban water security?
That's a great question. And I don't yet have a crystal ball to know what member states will finally commit to or promise at the conference itself, which is happening at General Assembly on March 22nd, starting March 22nd. But what we can see as of 2 days ago, the thematic dialogues for each of the 5 themes for the conference were published live on the conference website. And we know which countries are taking leadership on each of those themes. We're very closely engaged with the theme on climate, resilience, and environment, which is now being led by Japan and Egypt. And we're also supporting Indonesia in a special event on sustainable management of lakes at the conference, which we hope will be able to be shown there. So we have seen some very specific commitments that member states have said in what we're calling the Water Action Agenda. And what we're seeing there is really a recognition, first of all, that wetlands and other freshwater ecosystems provide essential ecosystem services, that these can be valued also in monetary terms, as well as other types of valuing them, and that they are worth protecting and restoring because they provide tangible benefits to societies and economies. So we're seeing a real awareness of that, and I think we're going to see a lot of that in the conference next month. But there are other important connections between land and water as well, and one of the things that we are focusing on in this thematic dialogue is source to sea connections, or the land ocean interactions. So basically what's happening at coasts. And this is where you find a lot of saltwater marshes or other saltwater wetlands as well. So we know that water moves in a cycle. We know that most of it is salty and sometimes it's fresh. And so at UNEP, we're really looking at this in a continuum of that water. And land plays a very important part in that process. So yes, we are very excited about the conference next month, and we are hoping for ambitious action coming out of it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Liz. Now, in interest of time, it seems like we have to conclude the question and answer session. I would like to thank all of our participants for the amazing questions and the amazing turnout of questions. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Murali Thumarukudi for his closing statement. Dr. Murali.
Thank you, Devasthi. I did part of my thanking already, but I once again want to thank all the participants for joining this session. The G20 Global Initiative is a relatively new initiative. We just started 1 year back. This is our second webinar, but we plan to run at least one webinar per month. And we have excellent participation from the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, UNEP, WEDER, NCBC, Wetland International, and of course, in this time, Ramsar Convention. We will continue with this webinar series. So while we invite you to the forthcoming webinar and keep in touch with us, I want to thank those of you who signed up. We had more than 2,000 people signing up. Possibly more than 1,000 people joined the session at multiple points of time. We had close to 700 simultaneous at a given time. I want to thank all the speakers for sparing their time, especially Secretary General Mosenda, because this is the most important day in her calendar. She must be having, I don't know, 200 events, 24 hours around the world, but I offered her that she can send a recorded message, but she did take the time and made an excellent speech, demonstrating the interconnectivity between this topic. Always a pleasure to have Dr. Jain, Wetlands International. Again, this must be a very important day for her, that Wetlands themselves must be conducting many sessions around the world. I want to thank Dr. Khalid, who consented to join and gave a presentation about the big activities which they are having in Saudi Arabia. I want to thank my fellow team from UNEP, who have multiple roles in Global Peatland Initiative, the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, and Liz. Thank you. I still consider myself as part of the UNEP team as well. So thank you. And then I have, my own team here who, while sitting in multiple countries, IB, Dicky, all of who could not join, they all contributed excellently to this. Thank you, Devasri, for your very good moderation effort. Congratulations. There are a large number of people behind the scene who have made an effort to make this a success. And I want to thank them all for making this event a huge success. Our next event would be with the White House on the nature-based solutions. That's what the White House wanted us to do this. So we are very excited about that. And we'll be doing 2 events with the White House this year, one on nature-based solution and one on the environmental economics strategy, which they came out in August. So with these words, and when I name people, I'm always a bit afraid because I always miss somebody, but if I have missed somebody, my apologies, but otherwise I want to thank you all and see you shortly. All of you who participated would be getting your certificate of participation. If you do not hear back from us, please do write to us in about 48 hours or next Monday. We will ensure that you have the certificates. We will sign you up to our newsletter, which will give information about all the forthcoming webinars. And we will also be editing the current event and putting it on the YouTube so that you will have an opportunity to share. Please do share the YouTube as well as your own observation about this on your social media handles. I saw hundreds of young people coming. Please share on your social media handles. We have to make this restoration work, this decade for restoration a huge success, and this generation, the generation restoration. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.